I've never told anyone about this before, mainly because I was alone when it happened, so there's no one else who could corroborate my story, and to be honest, I can't be sure it really happened, or if it was all just a mind trick. I've mentioned in previous videos that my parents have a small cabin in the Catskills, near a small middle of nowhere town, where me and my sister had a strange encounter with a house that was there one night and gone without a trace the following morning. This incident happened in the town late at night, after most of the residents had closed up and gone to bed for the evening. I was in my mid-20s, and I still had a sweet tooth, especially for ice cream, and I wanted to buy some before the convenience store closed. I drove down just in time, got my chocolate ice cream cone, with chocolate sprinkles, and got back into my car. I drove down the main street, toward the old covered bridge, hoping to cross it for a short cut back to the cabin. Back then, the bridge was operational to pedestrians and small cars. No heavy vehicles allowed. With one hand on the steering wheel, and the other on the ice cream cone, I slowly coasted down the main street, and turned onto the covered bridge road, only to find a barricade blocking the entrance. I sat there in the car, eating my ice cream, and staring at the bridge. It was an old wooden bridge, that looked more like a restored museum piece, than an actual functional bridge, and on that night it wasn't functional, at least not for cars. Sometimes, when there has been a lot of rain, or the river is high, they will close the bridge. But it hadn't rained in days, and the water level was lower than normal. The bridge didn't seem closed to pedestrians, just vehicles. I finished my ice cream, and decided to investigate. There is a small park associated with the bridge, called Covered Bridge Park. The park has a small shoreline with picnic tables, and space to fish or launch kayaks, and a small parking lot. Since the park closes at dusk, and I didn't want to risk being bothered by local police, I chose to leave the car parked on the corner of the street. I walked the extra few feet to the bridge. The main roadway had those old amber street lamps, but the bridge itself didn't have any lights. I brought a flashlight with me, which was adequate enough for the small dark space, and I cautiously walked through the bridge. It was surprisingly spacious on foot, not as cramped as it feels when you are trying to squeeze a car through it. Everything seemed normal and fine, until just before I exited the other side of the bridge. Just a few feet from the exit, I felt an odd sensation, a rush of air, like a humid cool breeze, and then the flashlight shut off, and at the same time, the street light in front of me flickered off. I turned around just in time, to see the street lights behind me flicker off as well. For just a brief moment, I was completely in the dark, unable to see anything. Before the panic could set in, my flashlight came back on, and I immediately exited the bridge, on the opposite side. For just a moment, it felt as if the bridge was alive, and about to slam its jaws closed around me. Once out on the other side of the bridge, I turned around to see the bridge was not alive, but just an ordinary bridge. I laughed at myself for being such a chicken. I noticed, the street lights didn't come back on though. But as long as my flashlight remained on, I wasn't worried. I decided that, to make up for my momentary cowardice, I would walk further down the dark road, and check out the town's historic cemetery. But, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The old cemetery didn't look very old anymore. The stone wall looked less worn, and there were fewer tombstones, and they looked newer as well. I noticed that the utility poles with electrical wire, and streetlights, were missing. At that moment the hairs on the back of my neck stiffened, and a chill went down my spine. I was afraid, but this was a different fear. It wasn't like a nightmare, or the fear of something coming out of the darkness. This was pure dread of a situation, completely out of my control. It was that feeling of being completely lost. I turned back to the bridge, and ran through it, hoping to get to my car on the other side. Before I made it out, I noticed the barricades were gone. I exited the bridge again, and shined my light around. The old barn and warehouse, across from the park's entrance, had a newer coat of paint, not the dull weathered paint it had before I entered the bridge. The entire main street was dark, the street lights and houses were all dark, and my flashlight didn't seem very bright anymore. I could only see a few feet in front of me, but I could tell the town was different. There were fewer houses, more woodland, and my car was gone. In fact, the road wasn't even paved anymore, it looked like dirt and gravel. Feeling confused, and turned around, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the bridge, crossed it again, and walked down the road, past the cemetery. At the end of the bridge road was an intersection merging into the main road, and there should be 2 farmhouses across from the cemetery. I panned my flashlight all around as I walked, noticing the differences of the cemetery, lack of power lines, and utility poles, and finally, the lack of farmhouses. The houses weren't there, but in their place was a large freshly plowed field. Up and down the main road was alternating freshly plowed fields, and dense corn fields, but no structures in sight. It took most of my willpower to stay calm, and not completely panic. I stood in the middle of the intersection, for what felt like several minutes, trying to figure out an explanation for what was happening. I noticed something else at that moment. I was alone, and I mean that in the purest sense of the word. I didn't see or hear anything else around me, no wildlife, no birds singing, no crickets chirping, no mosquitoes buzzing, and no frogs, just nothing. I looked up at the sky, and noticed it was jet black, no moon, no stars, no clouds, just empty black void. It didn't feel real, it felt artificial, like at any moment the lights would come on, and I would be in a film studio. I felt helpless, and defeated. I turned around, and started walking back to the bridge. I entered the bridge, and about halfway through, I stopped, turned around again, looked out into the dark void, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and shut off the flashlight. I don't know how much time had passed, but eventually I heard a distant booming sound. I felt the vibrations more than I heard the sound, and then I felt that humid cool breeze again. I opened my eyes, and started to cry, because I could see streetlights in the distance. I turned around, and rushed out the bridge, nearly running into the barricade. I made it to my car, and once inside, I looked at the time to see that only a few minutes had passed since the town had closed for the night. I turned the ignition, made a U-turn, and drove back to the cabin. During the drive, I had time to think about what had happened, and decided it was best not to tell anyone. And that's what I did. I got to the house, walked inside, and said nothing about what happened. My parents were already asleep, and my older siblings were watching DVDs in the living room. I gave a little wave, and headed straight to my bedroom for the night. If you were in my position, and this happened to you with no way to prove it, would you tell someone? The next time you happen to be driving in the Catskills, and if you see a covered bridge and want to test your luck, bring a camera with you, and maybe you can prove it. As for me, I choose to avoid that bridge altogether. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, why not subscribe and share it?